Yeah, other teams can just chat for audio.
I guess in the interest of time, I'll just proceed. If anyone doesn't consent or doesn't want to be recorded, I can cut you out later. But I guess we can start. I don't want to hold everybody up.
Alright, yeah. So PM, you can start.
Let me give him a call.
Are you sure you said this? Or do you think? Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Am I audible?
Am I audible? Let me know. So I'm audible. Okay.
I'm
Yeah, just give me a
audible.
second. Let me start my stop.
Just give me a second. Let me start my stop. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
okay.
My speech was
My speech will
in
start in
three,
three,
two,
two,
one.
one.
Before
Before
I
I
start on
start
my
my
arguments,
arguments,
I
I
would
will
first
first
like
like
to
to
state
state
four
four
layers
layers
of
of
mechanism.
mechanism.
Number
Number
one,
one,
we would
we
like to
would like
tell
to
you that
tell you that
REEs
REEs
are mostly found
are
in
mostly found in
China,
China,
Russia,
Russia,
Vietnam,
Vietnam,
Australia,
Australia,
and
and
all
all
those
those
other
other
developing
developing
countries.
countries.
These
These
are
are
the
the
places
places that are
most
most
prominent
prominent
and most
and most
rich in these
rich in these
REEs.
REEs.
Number
Number
two,
two,
we tell
we
you
tell
that
you
it's
this looks like
composite
sufficient
of countries
representation
in
in
the
the
world.
world,
We tell
gets a
you that
sufficient
every single
representation,
country in the
and
world
gets
gets a
a
sufficient representation,
a
which gets
share in
a
REEs.
share
The
in
exact number
REEs.
of
The exact
people
number
or
of people or
countries
countries doesn't
doesn't
matter because
matter.
on
So
our
on
side we
our
have a
side,
government
we have a
fiat
government
that
fiat
it will be diverse and
that
all
it will be diverse
major
and all
countries have
major
a role
countries have a role
inside this policy. Now,
inside this policy. Now,
number three, we tell you that it's
uh,
funded by
number
member
three, we tell you that
donations.
it's for these
This means
would
that
donate
REEs,
resources
and in
or
return, they might
REEs,
get a
and in
share of the
return they
resources,
might get
or
a
get
share
cheaper
of the
tech, or just get
resources
money in
or get
general.
cheaper tech or just get
Now,
money in
the
general.
way this is set up
Now,
is that
the way
most
this is set up is
countries
that most
will get the
countries will
REEs,
get the
and
REEs,
most
and most
countries
countries
will
will
get
get
money for
money for
donating their
donating their
REEs or
REEs
getting
or
cheaper
getting cheaper
technology, better access
technology,
to
better
technology,
access to
and better
technology,
developed
and better
technology for all
developed
the major
technology for
countries
all
in
the
the
major
world.
countries in the
Or
world.
they
Or
they might
they,
just get the
they might
result
just
of the
get the
REEs,
result
which
of the
is better
REEs,
anyway.
which is
Number
better
three,
anyway.
we tell you
Number
that
three, we tell you
mostly
that
brilliant academics or
mostly
really smart
brilliant
people from every single country who will be able to work together to actually develop the technology needed when they have access to these REEs. So we will pay them high salaries and ask them to develop the technology with everyone in the world together, which will lead to more developed technology, which will inevitably lead to a better life for every single person because every single country in the world has access to them because it is an international body. Number four, we carry that profits in countries look like the countries keep the money for themselves. The difference is that every single country in the world gets access to these REEs. Let me tell you first on my arguments why an international body would be better than private governments. We tell you that in status quo, both sides have REEs. The question is, what does each side do with them? On our side, we tell you that it's better because if we have a worldwide body, international body, in conjunction with my mechanism, we have smart people in every single country getting development. On up, everybody just works for themselves, for their own country, for their own profit, and develops their own technology, which will not be that efficient. But
Yeah,
number two, I would like to also say that, rejected, we also have an incentive to share. Most countries in status quo, like China or Russia, that are rich in these REEs, do not want to share because they prioritize giving it to their own citizens. Not saying that it's wrong, but in status quo, they are most likely to sell their REEs away for a very high price or not sell it away at all. This is very bad
yeah,
because we tell you here countries who are very low on REEs or are just poor in general, do not have access to these REEs, which the foresight have stated that is very, very important for technology advancement. We tell you that these countries missing out on these essential REEs is very important to note here because on our side, we give every single country the chance to actually gain these REEs because we tell you that we understand that these technological advancements are important. The reason that on their side this is bad is because the number three, we also like to talk about the environmental concerns because we also tell you that on upside they are not incentivized to actually follow regulations or follow like environmental policies because even if they do share a lot of the resources, they they are most likely to pollute the environment while doing it. Because let me tell you first that the process of extracting REEs pollutes the environment a lot. For example, fracking, which is the extraction of natural gases from underground, releases a lot of methane. And the reason that a lot of countries still do this is because it's cheaper to pollute. The difference on our side is that the international bodies actually provides checks and balances and provides regulations for them. So they actually do not pollute the environment because on your side, do not have an incentive whatsoever because cheaper means more money for them. Cheaper means that, hey, I can distribute all my REEs and get the most money out of it because of the fact
yeah,
that I
right.
charge a high price and I can harvest them cheaply. Yes.
Yeah, what are the
Yes.
types of restrictions that these international bodies are likely to impose on RE extraction?
Okay, so let me give you an example here. When Japan like dumped all their toxic waste or nuclear waste into the ocean, obviously all of us are very scared, right? All of us are very shocked by what they did. The fact is they did it because it was cheap. They did it because of the fact that it's hard or it's expensive to dispose of these things or these nuclear waste properly. But the fact that on our side we regulate these and we tell them you have to do it or you have to do it because it will harm the environment if you don't. We tell you here that these regulations will help the environment and also provide every single country the chance to get these REEs in the first place. Now, renewable energy and its devices, we tell you that it should be shared to every single person because REEs are an essential part of these renewable energy and these devices. These are very important for every single country, not only to save the environment, but for every single person's daily use. We tell you here that they're only allowing some people or only giving access to some specific countries because they're almighty and powerful, and because they're just rich of REEs does not means that we should not allow this at all. We tell you first that renewable and that on all countries who don't have much REEs can't have access to it or only get it at a high price, which is unfair. On our side, we make sure that every single person living in any single country can have access to these REEs and therefore can live a better life, can use the renewable devices, can use this renewable energy because they have advanced technology. We tell you that not only this is true, but it also provides a better world for advancing technology because more people around the world, more smart people, more scientists are developing technology that will be useful in the future. The fact that on your side, most countries will just hoard all their REEs themselves and keep it to themselves, give it to their own citizens, and only sell it to other people on a high price because they want money. We tell you this is very unfair. On our side, we make sure that everyone gets REEs at a fair price, yet the people who supply the REEs are also rewarded greatly. We tell you that it is the most fair policy because of the fact everyone gets access, the technology is developed at the same time. Number three, those countries who have REEs and donate the REEs to the international body in the first place also get an incentive to do so because of the fact that they get rewarded by cheaper tech, and all the things that I mentioned in my mechanism. That for all those reasons is why I'm so
Let's call it out.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Am I visible as well?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So, I prefer POIs exclusively on chat, please. So, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. 3 arguments from opening opposition. Firstly, why each country with different preferences or different interests lose flexibility on changing their prices or amount of production or prioritization between the economic issue and like environmental issue. Second argument, why like this international body have natural incentive jack up the price of this production because they neglect from the research and development. Finally, why this inhibited or disincentivize investors to like put money into this field, which significantly like make development lower and like the less efficient. Then on the first issue, like firstly that no doubt, like opening government magically assume that this international body is going to be very operated in a very magically fairy way, or so that everyone can like represent well. But this is untrue. This is likely to untrue for several reasons. Now, what is a likely like administration of these international bodies? We argue as same as a UN or the same as like OPEC, for example, like these like international body is based is the policy or decide for example like deciding prices or deciding the amount of extraction is likely to be very expensive or like very going to be in favor of superpowers, for example US, China, so that other countries are not able to represent their preferences, right? Then why is this the case, right? I think the states price setting or is going to in favor of them because like other large country like China or US are able to leverage other country with other industrial issue, or for example trading issue or a military issue. For example, they are having stronger soft power against other like other countries, so that they are able to weigh against the other country. This is a reason why in empirically evidence shows that in the UN or some big country like Russia, US have significant like have power to represent their own will. On the other hand, like small country like Chile or Bolivia do not have any leverage to change or change their like the price of this REE in the first place, right? Then this is a first flaw of an international body, right, which necessarily negate the opening government like premise assumption for them to claim that price is going to be something flexible or very cheap, which is very flat. Secondarily, I think these note that these a country with power have natural incentive to jack up their prices, right? Because they want to maximize the profit, right, without making any effort, right? So this is a reason why, like, if these corporation have, if these country have incentive to do that, like the price of is going to naturally jacked up on gut paradigm. This is flat. A good example in oil prices is literally like dominated by the Saudi Arabia because they have comparatively larger power to control over the market prices. So other countries lose leverage or other demand like each corporation who need for these kind of like products or material lose leverage and lose voice because market natural market competition totally lose out. Then what is a solvency in an opposition paradigm? firstly, before explaining two mechanisms why our opposition paradigm is better, firstly, I think we would like to frame this debate that we say even in a natural competition, especially we were talking about the REE, I think just like maximum prices going to be regulated individually by the country. The reason behind this is very simple, right? Especially when we are talking about these REE, which is very crucial for the in dealing with environmental issue or saving people's life. There is a massive political pressure from every single citizen to make these products something very available or faster these production, right? This is the reason why internally within each country they're likely to put a maximum prices for this, right? And secondarily, also in terms of the market competition, like price is going to like decrease because in order to beat other corporation or in order to acquire more market share, right? This is the reason why opposition paradigm is going to be maximum setting. Why the price is not going to be exponentially increased on our side of the house. Then we identify tool solvency on. Firstly, I'd like to explain first about flexibility, right? An opposition paradigm, like each corporation or country are able to acquire the flexibility on their changing prices or amount of extraction they export to other people. This is critical because for example, like each country have their like sovereignty on their sites or sovereignty on these REE, so that they are able to leverage against, they are able to negotiate in a multinational corporation who is providing extraction technology, so that they are able to pick and choose the best partner for the business. I will take the closing government later on, sorry. Then so that they are able to change their change prices very flexibly. The impact is very important. Each country in each moment have different preferences on it, like economical or environmental issue, right? Based on the political situation, like for example, while some developed country, for example, Norway, want to prioritize an environmental issue, which means that they want to have a moderate amount of extraction. However, in developing country with a flawless REE, for example, Chile or with lithium, they want to prioritize, they want to speed up the extraction in order to acquire the foreign currency, and they are able to invest to the other internal like industry, so that they are able to provide more job opportunity, which is a very urgent problem, right? Based on this premise that every country have different preferences, having the flexibility on prices is very important. Secondarily, in opposition paradigm, each country are able to deal with the very domestic economical shock, right? At the moment, you have an economical shock, for example, Japan in Lehman shock, for example, that by exporting the massive amount of lithium or REE, able to deal with this. I'm sorry, DLO will take it later. Then they're able to flexibly cope with the very economical crisis very preemptively, right? So this is the first impact. Second impact is that the competition mechanism works to minimize the production cost and acquire market production cost, right? Note that in a free market competition, like each country, country will not rely on the superpower, but they are going to rely on they try to minimize the production cost in order to maximize the profit, right? The US is going to like, for example, invest a lot in technology. This is generally going to like lower the prices of this technology, which is generally good because development of these technology was faster. Then final argument why this disincentivize investors to put money onto these things, right? Because in gut paradigm, investor is going to lose their confidence because they become the decision or price decision or demand will be very, very unpredictable and very untransparent, because not like in someday, like very suddenly, the price might change, right? But in our side of the house, investors are able to speculate. They're able to predict the price based on the demand or a supply, same as other stock market, right? This means that it's gonna be less amount of money put in the field, which lead to less amount of less speed or efficiency of development. For that reason, plan to oppose.
All right, DPM.
Hello, can I check that I'm visible and audible? Hello? Oh. Sorry. Hi, can I check that I'm audible and visible? Okay, thanks. I want to note the angle that opening opposition takes in this debate. Their response was not an international body is bad. Their response was regulation is bad. Insofar as that is the angle they took, I'm gonna show you why it gets worse on their side. I don't think they ever respond to PM when he says that a diverse set of countries is more transparent than a single country and that the comparative on op is worse. I'm gonna do a few things. One, I'll take out OO. Secondly, I'll tell you why international organizations. Lastly, I'll tell you again what our benefits are and extend a little bit. One, let's deal with OO. I think the biggest part of their case is that they would jack up the price and countries would lose the flexibility and therefore this disincentivizes investors. Three responses. One, perfect that they bring up the example of OPEC. OPEC keeps oil prices fair and stable for the rest of the world. The comparative is a country having control over the supply. Like transparency is a lot worse under op insofar as there are geopolitical risks like a war or supply chain disruptions like caused by COVID, for example. Prices get a lot worse under their side of the house. We love the fact that an organization like OPEC exists, right? They can cut prices, they can decide how much oil to sell in the market, and it keeps the prices stable. So there is an argument for centralization, not for decentralization. But secondly, I think PM tells you we have an incentive to help the environment. That is to say the products of these things are things which are good for the environment, so we don't know why there isn't an incentive to sell it to other people. You can make money from it. I don't know why. The second thing is, again, I just alluded to this, that the RE itself is probably not worth much money unless you can convert it into a product. That is to say, they have an incentive to convert into a product and then sell it for a higher profit margin. So I don't know why companies would sit on their ass with a large reserve of REs when in the comparative, ceding control to an international body allows them to sell more. No, thank you. But three, this idea that countries have different incentives is literally a concession that they will not share. Like we gave you systematic reasons in the PM why countries are likely to hoard the supply for their citizens, why likely comparatively it's going to be higher price on their side. On the comparative, if we can centralize it in an international body which controls both supply and pricing decisions, we think it's a lot better under our side. This argument on investor confidence is bonkers because what is more transparent? Let's look at this on a comparative. Is it China more transparent or is an international body with sufficient representation more transparent? We think obviously the existence of international organizations proves that it's better for our side. I think the op probably lies in some argument about China, not an argument against regulation entirely. No thank you, Arjun. Secondly, okay, argument time. Let's talk about why international organizations. The first thing I want to highlight is a trend analysis that as the world moves towards more globalization and we are more about soft power and less about military power, there is a need for international bodies to provide checks and balances. Countries often join a large variety of international bodies in the status quo already. Things like the UN, the IMF, ICSID, WHO, FAO, OECD, PCA. I work at one of these organizations, so I should know. So there's a need for these bodies in comparison to countries. And the reason for this is simple, that country against country is viewed as a geopolitical risk that countries are often reluctant to challenge one another if one country is hoarding the supply or hoarding the means of production. But having an international body means people are able to come together comparatively, of course, and able to work towards solutions together the same way we do in OPEC. The second thing is, I want to say we would like more political participation. The same way NGOs like Amnesty International has an effect on political policies like the ICC, the death penalty, education for children, raising the age of criminal responsibility in Australia, we also would like these countries to affect political policies like pricing, like supply. We love that. We're all for that on OG. The second thing we told you that went unresponded to is that this international body is likely to be funded by member donations the same way the UN and the IMF functions. Is there a case of regulatory capture? Probably, but countries are also likely to view the donation as an investment for the future. And here's the nuance, that things like renewable energy have a huge one-time cost. Like a solar panel is a huge one-time cost of $2,000, $20,000, but it pays for itself over time. We think therefore countries are likely to make this investment over time. No thank you. The last thing is on why international organizations are much better than national governments. We think the first thing is a nuance of military tension. That is to say, scientists in the organization are able to decide collectively on how the REs are extracted and how they are distributed. And scientists notably are quite different from politicians, where a politician doesn't have to confront another politician who is hoarding supply, and their geopolitical tensions at risk. We think scientists are probably a good enough middleman to regulate the supply. Number two, let's talk about our benefits. The first thing I think which went unresponded to again was that we simply have more brains coming together. Insofar as we will pay high salaries and coalesce a group of nations, we think members of scientists coming together can extract the REs faster. This looks like faster extraction, maybe less polluting of the environment. We gave you a fracking example, again unresponded to. As smart as you are, there's probably someone smarter, and it's quite intuitive to make the argument that more brains working together equals better methods of extraction, right? We think we allow people to unite and come together across borders. I'm gonna move on to diversification, but before that I'll take CO maybe.
Yeah, if there's a disagreement between whether what country should mine this thing and how it should be mined, how is this international body going to resolve that disagreement within itself?
The same way all international bodies resolve tensions, probably a consensus. The nuance is that it is not tied to a government, so it's not a US versus China or West versus China thing, but it's more of like a scientist thing. Like on your side, you need to defend the US, like being at loggerheads against China. I don't know why that's better. Let's talk about diversification in supply chain. The good thing about OPEC is that it allowed oil supply to stabilize, so importers could count on a constant supply. We think the same thing can happen for REs. That is to say, insofar as China, has a shrinking economy or has, for any reason, being a dictatorship, decides to hoard the supply, it is harder for us to get supply of this RE. The comparative we told you in PM is that countries like Brazil, Russia, Vietnam, where we can centralize the collection of these resources and have some in reserve, we're better able to regulate the prices. So if they want to talk about high prices, you also need to defend countries like China and Russia being dictatorships and not sharing it with the rest of the world. Please tell us why that comparative is better. We think they can hold it hostage, they can keep more than needed, they can have inequitable distribution, it doesn't get across to the entire world. Lastly, on transparency, CO is my PM. What are the restrictions we impose? Probably price caps, less price gouging, labor laws, the way it's extracted has to be less pollutive. Labor laws are very different across the world. We think we get to standardize that. Maybe less child labor in China. I don't know. Insofar as we allowed the centralization of collecting and pricing these REs, we are very proud to propose. Please go, OG.
Red yellow.
Okay, am I audible and visible?
Yep.
Thank you. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. All cases very simple and threefold. First, it will lose this international organization loses out the each individual developing countries the flexible choice to flexible economic choice, and also secondly, this organization will likely to carry out the price gouging, and it increases the cost of the each individual citizens to buy the smartphones or the electric vehicles or these kind of things. Lastly, it would impede the research and development sector. Before moving on to this kind of extension, I would rebut against the environmental parts. The first thing which they said is like this international organization has much more confidence compared to the each individual countries that carrying out their own the environmental policies. First thing I want to note is the country who have leverage inside this the international organization is as they said, China or Russia, which this kind of a country who has much more power and much more the rare metals compared to the other country, and also have less incentive compared to the other developed countries such as in the Europe or the US, no incentive to care about the environmental issues. I'm very unsure why this international body who leveraged by these countries have more power, have more incentive to care about the environmental problem. But secondly, I want to note is on the comparative in outside the house, the organization which you likely to carry out the extraction is coming from the MNC, which is coming from the developed countries. Then the MNC will negotiate each individual the developing nations and to extract resources from these countries. Compared to the MNC's the restriction and this like the international organization were composed by mainly the developing countries. I prefer to credit the MNCs because they are funded by the developed countries who have much more awareness towards the environmental issues. For these reasons, I don't think the environmental problem is improves in their side of the house, and also they don't show like any degree of the delta how the environmental actions will changes in their side of the house. Moving on to our extensions, why in the first place, like the companies who that each individual companies lose their autonomy of the lose their autonomy of the economy. The first, they said like the more the individual developing countries have more access to the technologies to extract the resources. I have to point out these technologies is never get opened to developing countries. Rather, it is closed into the specific countries such as China or the Australia who have already have the improved technologies over this extraction process. How this looks like that this institution will likely to regulate the quality of the products, such as you have to sell under the name of these institutions, or like the lithium OPEC, I don't know, you have to purify the lithium over like the 99% or 99.9% to ensure the market to ensure the market price towards price of these kind of products. Therefore, then these like the Australia or the China will likely to demand these countries to buy their own technologies in their countries and increase the cost of the cost of selling for this, and also the patents the patents fee will also rises in their side of the house. For these reasons, each individual developing countries will lose the autonomy of the economy because they have to necessarily buy these kind of technologies to purify these kind of things. The secondary I have to say is secondary, which they said the OPEC or these institutions, no thank you, is now carrying out the fair prices. I'm really unsure on the comparative. We have the much more competition against each individual countries and have the developing countries who don't have the much market share will likely to sell in the lower prices, and the fair price competition will more likely to happen in our side of the house. Why there is comparatively more fair in their side of the house in the first place. Then secondly, I'm going to say the price gouging in our side of the house, because the more superpower have leverage in our side of the house to regulate and to setting the price of each the ROEs, then the price will likely to increase in our side of the house. What this means is your usual devices like the smartphones or the electric vehicles, which is necessary for your modern life, is much more price gouging. This means that the average individual person's life is much more worsened in their side of the house. The average person will have to spend more money in their side of the house. Before moving on to the R&D sector, I will take your point.
Whose point?
Okay. See.
Yeah, not all superpowers are the same. The US doesn't have substantial rare earth deposits like China, Brazil, and Vietnam do. So the US will want the price of rare earths down, even if China wants the price of rare earths up. You haven't explained why China pushing for prices to go up means everyone will just agree and prices will just go up when the US wants prices down.
I want to say, especially in the lithium or the rare metal sector, China has more amount of the power than the US because they have more potential resources inside of China and Russia for this kind of institution, I have to say. Therefore, they have much more leverages. Moving on to the R&D sector, we have said because the market is much more unpredictable in their side of the house, then the founders will likely to decline the investment. What they said is, compared to the individual countries such as investing into the China, international institutions has much more confidence. I don't know that is true because because in your side of the house, you have to care the multiple countries are the motivation and the incentive to the one decisions. Even if the China will decide to down the prices, maybe the US or maybe the Russia will want to increase the prices. You have to care about each the political condition of the individual countries, and the price of this REE much more unpredictable in their side of the house compared to our side of the house, which you have to only focus on the one country's political and economical decisions. lastly, I'm going to say is they said like we can invite more amount of like the smart brains inside this institution. That is completely not true, because in outside the house we have the fair competition, and the company has more incentive to hire like a competent person than their side house to compete against the other company and outcompete the other companies. The conclusion of this R&D sector is like we have the much more faster development to like the environmental free products, and also like the lower cost to create a new products. That is also connected to their like improvement of the environment. For these reasons, we have the more leverages on the developing countries, and also the price is lower in outside the house. R&D is faster. For these reasons, we beg to oppose.
All right, thank you so much, colleague member from here.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
PY is in the chat. There are two problems with OG. One, the motion clarification specifies that this is a regulatory body, not an extractive body. Per the motion clarification on Discord, they can impose regulation or set up standards for every country to follow. So the international body isn't doing the mining itself. So OG's claim on agglomerating different scientists to make the mining more efficient is off clash. Countries are doing their own mining on both sides of this debate. Second, this is an analysis motion. The word motion wording says supports. This means OG doesn't have modeling power. It can't just make them super cheap. It can't just distribute them super well. As opening opposition points out, what opening government had to analyze is explain why the international body works well and why the international body isn't just subject to the overwhelming leverage that countries with a ton of rare earths already have. We will answer the questions of opening opposition, thus resolving the top half clash. Two areas of extension. One, the international body will be successful. There are two reasons opening government doesn't prove their case, and we will now. One, opening government uses their fiat excessively. They have fiat to create an international body. They don't have fiat for countries to join it. They don't explain why countries with substantial rare earths like China and Malaysia will join the international body rather than just all the countries that don't have rare earths but want them. And second, even if they do join, as opening opposition points out, if China has all the reserves of scandium, if Malaysia and Vietnam have all the reserves of yttrium, there is no reason why anyone will have leverage over them in the construction of regulation. Opening government doesn't explain why the international body will then make the prices go down when the countries that have rare earths want the prices to go up and have the leverage to opt out of the body or refuse to listen to regulations. We are going to fill that gap. I'm going to explain why other countries that join this body actually do have leverage over China, over Malaysia, over Vietnam, over Brazil, will cause them to join the body and will cause them to bring prices down rather than up. There are four structural reasons why. One, because buyers have leverage, not just sellers. Sure, China might want to hoard this technology, but Brazil, Vietnam, these countries want to export the technology to buyers to get revenues out of it. Why? Because they don't just want resource-based economies. Vietnam is trying to diversify into manufacturing, for which they need substantial foreign exchange by selling the rare earths that they have abroad. This is what Australia wants as well. It doesn't just want the rare earths for itself, it also wants to sell rare earths abroad so it can get large amounts of revenue to invest in its own economy. But this gives buyer countries leverage, because if the US is buying rare earths from Brazil and Vietnam, it can say, I will only buy rare earths from countries that comply with the regulations of this international body, even if they bring the price down. And that is leverage that forces or pressures countries to join this body. Second, different countries have different rare earth minerals. Everyone's just assuming rare earth metals are a single thing. Scandium and yttrium are different rare earth elements that might be deposited in different countries. So Vietnam might have lots of deposits of one rare earth element, but they might want to be a buyer for another rare earth element. So they join the body because they realize lowering the price of that other rare earth element is good for their economy so that they can buy the rare earth. And that is an incentive for rare earth suppliers to join the body and comply with its regulation. Third, there are other ways you can create leverage within this body. Why? Because it is likely connected to the World Trade Organization, where disputes on things like export restrictions on rare earths exist today. What leverage can you have? Leverage by slapping tariffs on the goods of other countries that don't join. If Vietnam refuses to join, you can slap a tariff on textiles and automobiles and electronics parts that are exported from Vietnam and other markets outside of just rare earths. Remember, rare earths are not the only good in the world. You can find leverage over other countries in different ways and use that leverage to bring them to you. And fourth, both. Many countries need investment to engage in rare earth extraction. Brazil doesn't have substantial domestic mining companies of rare earths. It needs American MNCs to come to Brazil and do the mining for them so the US can use that leverage it has over Brazil. Critically, the international body will try to lower prices. Why? Because more countries want rare earth prices down than rare earth prices up. They say superpowers don't. No, some superpowers like the US do. Some superpowers like China don't. Who breaks the tie between these superpowers in the body? Every other country that can vote in this body's elections. And therefore, the voting pressure is likely to be pressuring to bring rare earth prices down since more countries don't have rare earths. That's why they are relatively rare, i.e. they are hard to extract. As a consequence, you are likely to have a body that wants to bring prices down, and you are likely to have leverage over countries that don't want to bring the prices down. This answers opening opposition's objection, and it's the prerequisite for accessing any of opening governance impacts. Now let's talk about our second extension on why we prevent cartelization and ensure competition is actually possible. Because OG's mechanism for lowering the price is just, oh, we lower the price by force. The international body will just set the price. But they don't explain why the international body is likely to do that. This is an analysis topic. You can't just fiat it. And it's pretty unlikely to me. Like, an international body won't just simply take rare earths and give it whatever the fuck the price it wants. It wants some market allocation mechanism because it wants to attract investment into rare earth minerals as well. Additionally, OG doesn't prove that rare earths are expensive now. If they don't prove that rare earths are expensive now, then they don't have a margin. And opening opposition says, well, competition exists in the market. If competition exists in the market to sell rare earths, then prices are low. So this extension is going to explain why competition doesn't exist right now and why we need this international body to create competition. What are the burdens of this argument? Burden one, there is substantial risk of cartelization where countries don't compete against each other. A small number of countries have most of the world's rare earth deposits. Because deposits are relatively random, there is no reason for them to be concentrated, and only some countries have the capacity to find and extract them when they are not located in mining clusters. These countries have incentives to collude to fix prices. They are not going to compete against each other. Why? Because if they compete against each other, they'll keep undercutting each other and both the countries will be worse off. What's better is for them to enter into silent agreements with each other where they collude in order to fix prices and ensure prices are higher than they were before, which is why opening opposition's competition mechanism doesn't materialize in the real world. Different countries with different rare earths often collude to keep prices high so they can keep exporting at high prices. Second burden, this body will regulate against this cartelization and collusion for three reasons. One, buyer countries have incentives to bring prices down and generally outnumber seller countries. Second, cartelization is heavily stigmatized in domestic laws of countries. For example, domestic antitrust law, which will often be exported over to international law. And third, major corporations that aren't involved in extraction will lobby to regulate cartelization. This flips opening opposition's claim that investment is gutted when investors are uncertain about the price. They're way more uncertain about the price when a single monopoly cartel is fixing the price to whatever the fuck it wants, and it's not a market mechanism that is setting the price. This is what results in lowering the price, because if you stop cartelization, then countries that produce rare earths are forced to compete against each other. This is when you get adoption of green technology. This is when you get technological innovation that drives economic growth. Rare earths are accessible when there is competition, but contrary, there isn't competition. This body creates the competition. Very happy to propose.
Right, thank you so much. Member of here.
Just check am I audible and visible?
Nope.
Okay. Let me start my paper. Pronunciation, your eyes probably, I will not be checking the chat. At the end of CG, I'm unclear why all the things they say can only happen via an international body and can't happen in status quo right now. The US can choose to buy from whoever they want to right now. If they think a country is more environmentally friendly, they can choose to do so right now. The US can use leverage right now. They can call on their allies to sanction China right now, but they don't do so because of other reasons. Their own call out as to whether countries will join this or not is an evidence that countries can just bypass the regulations that's imposed. And even if they don't, and this organization still tries to impose harsh things, again, like I'm unclear to the degree at which it can, and if it is true that countries can just opt out of it, then the power this organization has is very little and can probably impose very marginal things. We will prove there is an active harm the moment this organization is formed that creates a negative impact for their side, and we will also prove why this harms global supply chains, which just it removes environmental efforts to create a more healthy planet. Firstly, then we'd like to think that their entire case is unfeasible, and if we prove this, our case is logically prior to 00, because what they just said is just that once this body happens, the certain specificalities after that is only something as bad. I'd like to point out a few problems that you have as soon as you have an international body, whether it's to regulate environmental materials or whatnot, right? Firstly, lobbying. Some nations have disproportionate influence, like they say themselves, right? Like the Bretton Woods and whatnot. This means that just smaller nations will not want to opt into a system where they will be oppressed by the US or oppressed by a big nation if they know they're not going to stand to benefit much from it, right? But secondly, corruption. There is no fiat that this will be done well, and I think they agree to this, right? But the harm of corruption is that the trust within this body will go down, and there's also a high degree of things to go wrong, right? Like OEC, I think I forgot the name, the oil regulator, also suffers from a lot of corruption, which causes the degradation of investor confidence and also causes a bunch of external harms that we don't want to avoid, right? But third thing here is that gridlock. Even if you do things by consensus voting and all the other things, that just means it's so much more difficult, right? Some nations will want to have veto powers, some nations will want to have more voting power. Like the UNSC is a testament to how inefficient this voting system is and how inefficient the ability to get decisions through will be. I think this is specifically harmful since the harm to rare earth mineral supply chains particularly causes a unique harm that you can't get on either side, right? So I also like to make a few other things. Also, this international body has no enforcement power, right? If all actors go against China in this body, China can still just go ahead and mine resources like it's doing now. A poor third world African country can still give China the contract and China can still cut in. There's no way that the body is going to use military action against China right now, right? And who's going to stop it? And China already does a lot of bad things and it still is not getting sanctioned for it, like child labor. This body does not touch on child labor, right? Second thing here, the international body will be demonized by people and China or Russia will blame this body for the problems of environmental degradation or the problems of colonialism rather than take the blame onto itself, and the average person in those third world countries will be able to buy into the rhetoric. The intuition for this is that the IMF is supposed a good institution that gives loans to people. It is already being demonized in many African countries, whether that's called for or uncalled for. It is a fact that the support and buy into those institutions are less trusted upon, and that means that people will pressure their politicians to not agree to those things and to boycott those things, right? But thirdly, it also causes more fighting between nations, right? Developing countries who harvest their own REE right now will have to face the regulations of this regulatory body, and they will view that as an infringement of their sovereignty. Even if this body wants to control prices, that is again an infringement of their sovereignty. It will be framed that way and be used as a weaponization against this body, against the efficacy of this body. I think that just proves that this is unfeasible, and that just proves that this body creates more harm than it does good. If I move on to the point.
Yeah, so the international body is bad, but why is the comparative better? China only allows their own companies to mine REEs, their pollution gives local villagers cancer, they price it however they want. Why is this better than an international body then?
Okay, perfect. Second flash. How we benefit the environment and why our side is better. On OG, they bring up the idea that extracting REs pollute the environment. 3 direct responses to this. 1, to mitigate. They won't destroy the entire ecosystem, right? That's unfeasible. Secondly, this happens already. Normal mining is much worse because there's way more normal resources around like zinc and all those iron and stuff. And your organization will not be able to regulate those things because it only regulates RE, and those things are just much harder to regulate, right? But thirdly, environmental damage is also cause from RE extraction does not create a tipping point in this debate. It's reversible. You can just build back the land or cover it up or do certain things, and it's also localized. It doesn't affect urban areas because you primarily mine these things in non-urban areas and far away from people, so it doesn't really cause a direct environmental harm to people. I think the comparative use sacrifice then is much worse. What are REEs used for? Environmental technology, right? Where an environmental technology prices depend on RE supply, but also secondarily, making consumer tech more accessible. I think one, it will be cheaper and faster on our side to get these resources out and to get these things, right? For a few reasons. One, there's less requirements to mine it. You don't have to buy a certain machinery. You don't have to get inspection as fast as all those annoying things. Secondly, you don't have to go through layers of bureaucracy to finally mine it. Even if the restrictions are low, you still have to get all nations to approve of it. Make sure that no one lobbies to vote against you. Make sure that no one vetoes it. Thirdly, you won't be subject to gridlock and bad policy negotiations at the top level. And finally, I also think that to rebut the idea that countries keep prices high, let's analyze the RE supply chain, right? China has a large EV market which requires RE. If the US makes REs expensive, China will just buy from a cheaper exporter, or China will harvest the material from the source itself. So the US has to make the prices cheaper so that China will buy from the US. If not, China will just extract these things from itself and then gain all the benefits, whereas the US will not have a market to supply these things to. And the US also has the incentive to make it cheaper naturally without an international body, because it wants to sell to its allies in the EU. It just wants a bigger market, also wants leverage. And if the EU thinks that the US prices are too high, the EU will buy from China, and then the EU will become more China aligned, all those things, right? The bottom line here is that you need to make it cheaper to you because you sell to consumers, right? If you don't sell this, there's no incentive to mine this, right? You need to process it into a product like an electric vehicle to send to consumers. If you make the prices of the RE itself high, your entire EV market will become too expensive and no one will buy that. That's to say, I think consumers in of itself acts as a good enough natural regulatory mechanism. You don't need an international body to do so. I think it just creates more bureaucracy, creates more problems. How do you weigh this? If we don't overly regulate the extraction of oil, chocolate, animal farming, I see no reason why we should start with REEs. You only reverse a small harm and sacrifice a big benefit. Secondly then, why is REE in eco-tech the most important thing in this way? Even if extraction is done badly, if you're able to make environmental technology cheaper, then the benefits are better. Why? Because environmental tech success doesn't just depend on innovation, it depends on more people using it, and that depends on it being cheaper. Why does our side create a tipping point then? I think the price of REE in comparison to other like components of technology is very high, and it also fluctuates way more, right? So a slight harm in the supply chain causes a massive price change, which one, scares away investor. We actually provide you the mechanism to achieve OO's benefits, but secondly, makes people not buy it. The impact of this is that people buy fossil fuel products instead of environmental technology. I think the harms of that are very obvious. You create less of a momentum, which you already have in society right now. But secondly, tech becomes less accessible to poor countries, right? A 100 price increase in an iPhone maybe doesn't affect you as a rich person, but a $50 increase in a Xiaomi phone makes the difference between I as a poor student in Malaysia being able to afford a laptop for my school and me not being able to afford a laptop to access online classes and all those things. For all those reasons, vote CO.
Alright,
Tejas is the only speaker in this round who actually analyzes the likely case of what this international body will look like, why it will be successful at achieving buy-in, and why as a result it will be successful at lowering the prices of the rare earth elements that every team in this round agrees are important for things like technological development around the world. What does Tejas bring you, and why is this round winning? I think firstly, in terms of buy-in, we just uniquely explain why both sellers and buyers are going to have incentives to opt in. I think that the pushback that we get from CO is just like, oh, like there might be individual things that like make them mad or that they disagree on, but I don't think that this is enough to beat the mechanisms that Tejas gives you. Look, for example, to other international organizations like the World Trade Organization. Not every policy that the WTO has is beneficial to every country, but the fact that there is a centralized body that has rules that every country is forced to follow and punishments if they don't follow it means that every country ends up being better off. Because if it didn't exist, there would be a collective action problem where any one country could benefit from doing things like making more favorable trade deals with certain countries, from doing things like violating some of the like export restrictions, etc. that it has, but when it exists, it makes every country better off. We think that this international body would be similar. Specifically, Tejas explains to you why the fact that buyers have leverage forces sellers to actually come to the table, and because there are just more buyers than sellers because of the ways these rare earth minerals are distributed, and because even countries that have large deposits of certain rare earth elements still need to buy other rare earth elements from other countries, they're just all forced, they all have incentives to buy in, even if the result is that they're going to be selling the rare earth elements that they have at lower prices. But so I think that this, like, firstly, just already beats open government at the point where it explains the likely scenario and why this international body is still likely to do well. But I think secondly, this already responds to the vast majority of the claims that we're getting from top bench at the point where we explain why countries are going to have incentives to buy in and do this well. But the second thing, and equally important, is that we just explain why you're actually going to be able to lower prices. Because I think that most of the mechanisms that we're getting in the round on prices ignore the reality of the market right now. I'll get to that in a moment. Let me respond to what we get from opening opposition. The first thing that they talk about is flexibility, in terms of countries should have the flexibility to mine the rare earth elements that they want when they want them. I think the first thing to note is that there's just inherently like a random distribution around the world where some countries have more and other countries have less. We think that the international body is somewhat important to rectifying some of those just like inherent discrepancies. We don't think that some country deserves to just have like a huge monopoly over the resources just because they happen to be like located in that country. But secondly, and more importantly, I think that the flexibility that they talk about is bad, because at the point where countries have so much control over these markets, that's what allows for the monopolization, that's what allows for the higher prices. The next thing that OA wants to talk about is the actual prices. POIs in the chat, please, I'll take you in a moment. Cool, let's talk about price. So I think their analysis all rests on the idea that competition is good for lowering prices. The problem is that our extension then is logically prior, because Tejas proves to you why the status quo is not actually competition. In the status quo, you only have a few suppliers who can dominate the market, and they can do things like restrict the amount that they are exporting and form cartels with the other countries who supply who supply the same rare earth element. What this means is that they have the capacity to artificially drive prices up, and they do so. They collude with other countries so that they can maximize their profit. The problem then is that you don't actually get the cheap prices that opposition bench wants to talk about. In contrast, you only get those when you have an international body, because the international body has the ability to actually prevent these cartels from forming and to investigate collusion and make sure that countries aren't just artificially driving up the prices. We're the only side that can actually lower prices. But the last thing that they talk about is investment, and I want to note that I also think that our extension flips this, because Tejas explains why companies have access to more international investment if other countries have access to their rare earth elements. When an international body exists to ensure a fair market, you're just better able to access this investment from other countries. But even if you don't buy that, we think that extraction is probably lucrative enough on both sides to promote investment. Even if profits go down slightly, they'll still be very high, so we don't think investment is the issue. We think the bigger issue is in terms of market distribution and stopping cartels from actually being able to jack up the prices. Before I move on to rebut CO, I'll take opening opposition.
Okay, so your mechanism on participation is very flawed, because race to bottom and prisoner's dilemma problem happen. Buyers want to buy unqualified products because it's gonna be much cheaper. If you sneak, you're able to access more cheaper prices. That's why sellers do not follow the regulations.
No, we think that like it's an iterated prisoner's dilemma, right? At the point where like we think that like they have incentives to buy into these in the long run, because every country benefits at the point where they're in the international body. Even if they lose out on some trade deals, they benefit from the fact that countries know that overall they are following the requirements of the international body. Like, every country is both a buyer in some transactions and a seller in others. I've already explained why the existence of an international body is the only way that we can actually drive prices down. On your side, you just get monopolization and cartels in a way that's incredibly problematic. Moving on to CO. I think that CO just says that like the US and countries have enough leverage right now to solve for the issues, but I just don't think that this is true. You specifically need an international body to do things like create codified rules for leverage, since you need countries to coordinate in order to exert that leverage. There's a collective action problem absent an international body, where any one buyer can't solve the problem of cartels and monopolization. Say the US tells like countries that they're price gouging and that they should lower the price to a fair market price. Because other countries still want to buy the minerals, they'll offer a price that's slightly higher what the US says, bidding the price back up. This is worsened at the point where you have cartels. Then they just say that there's like gridlock and you can't get consensus, but we think and that there's no enforcement, but a body uniquely provides the enforcement. I think their body can do things like investigate and have judges and courts to resolve disputes like the WTO does. One country doesn't have the capacity to do this. We also think that like it's fine if you can't get consensus, you can vote. We can already explain why voting on net is going to favor buyers and drive prices down. We also just think that a body is necessary to create like opt-in. Backing out after signing on looks perceptually bad both domestically and abroad. So like if, for example, Brazil joins this international body, they'll find it really hard to quit. All of this is to say, lastly, like on their argument about the environment, like one, I think that it's like like, I think that countries care a lot more about having access to rare earth elements than these environmental concerns, which is why even if there's some regulation, the regulation's unlikely to have a massive impact on the market as a whole, at the point where countries care more about decreasing the prices so that every country can use these elements to innovate. Because we're the only side that analyzes the likely case and proves why it's really beneficial for lowering prices, very proud to stand on CG.
All right. Optic.
Just give me a few seconds to set up my timer. Alright, I can't turn on my camera because I have some network issues, but yeah. On Gauss's best case, the international body will always have debilitating and harmful conditions that restrict the ability of developing countries to actually achieve economic prosperity. Two clashes in this speech. Firstly, on the feasibility, and secondly, on the effects on the global supply chain. But before that, I want to deal with CEO's extension of cartels. I think firstly, this is just factually untrue, right? Cartels won't actually occur and won't actually develop. Because unlike oil, these REEs are used to produce consumer products. So China will mine it, and China will give it to the companies within the nation, or the US facilitates their own companies buying it. That, for example, the US would develop its own semiconductor pipeline to prevent China from having leverage. But secondly, cartels send a signaling effect that you as a country cannot be trusted on and you cannot be relied on because you have such bad incentives. Therefore, other countries will come in and conquer the market. But lastly, if a country or if the few countries really want to form a cartel, guess what? They will form it anyway and they will opt out of the body. So first question on feasibility. I think Arjun gave you 5 reasons why this whole system won't work and people won't actually opt in, right? I think firstly, we told you that when you have an international body, lobbying occurs because dominant nations have the largest capital and the largest allies. This is important because it means that whatever decisions are made by this international body will never be proximate to the incentives of the developing countries who has these resources. And no, that's just a prerequisite to unlock the benefits from OO. But secondly, corruption exists, and this is the degradation of trust and investor confidence. Thirdly, gridlock exists because if you really want all countries to have an equal say, you get and you have consensus voting, you increase bureaucracy and you increase inefficiency. But fourthly, the international body is demonized when they do bad things and it results in bad outcomes. China and Russia will capitalize on this, and this deters other countries from joining. But lastly, this just causes more infighting because what happens with regulation is that when developing countries cannot meet this, China or America that has the capacity and that they have the machinery and technology that efficiently, they will come into these developing countries and they will exploit them and benefit from all the profits of this. I want to know, this was important because to respond to CG, all of their reasons of feasibility is dependent on someone joining in the first place, because that's where they get the ability to place tariffs and leverage themselves as a buyer. So they basically need large countries like the EU, and they also need like America to join and opt in first. But insofar as to give you 5 reasons as to why no suppliers of these rare earth minerals are going to opt in, and the higher prices that result from the unstable supply chain will just screw over the whole market, you also deter large developed countries and you deter suppliers from entering into the system. What's the weighing there? And this is important because it means that most of government's benefits fly out the window. But this also outweighs OO because it gives you structural reasons as to why this dominant exists, and this is why there's no incentive for other countries that hold these resources to opt in to only to be at the control of bigger countries. Before I move on, I'll take a point from opening.
Closing?
Yeah, sure.
15 seconds. An international body has no incentive to create excessive restrictions because countries in the body will want to avoid said excessive restrictions. We give you 4 mechanisms for why countries opt in, and the US can't just use its leverage unilaterally. Either countries hoard for their own businesses, so we stop export restrictions, or we prevent cartelization that they have every incentive to do if they're selling the minerals themselves. Either hoarding or cartelization, either is prevented.
I think I already responded to this, right? Cartels who really want to form and exploit the market will form anyways by just opting out of the system. But harmful regulations and restrictions will exist because that's what OG told us, right? They told us that it was imperative that we had things that reduce pollution. It was imperative that we ensure the long-term sustainability of these resources. And these are the harmful restrictions that means that developing countries can no longer obey it. And therefore, that's when the exploitative harmful Western countries will come in and hijack all the profits, right? Second question on how this affects the global supply chain. I think the main push we get from OG here is that on their side, they are better able to increase the incentive to share to other countries who don't have the REE resources, right? I think firstly, I don't know how this actually occurs because there's no mechanization as to how the international body is going to mandate this insofar as nobody opts in. But also, even if they do opt in, these countries will probably push back because they have their own selfish interests, like China has their own selfish interests. But secondly, this is just untrue and it just makes no sense. Even if China has all the REE, guess what? They process them and they turn them into cars, phones that they sell globally, that they sell worldwide, which everyone else can also buy. But thirdly, I don't think sharing to other countries is an immediate benefit. Because even if you give, like, I don't know, Rwanda or like Thailand this REE, right, you still need mechanization as to how this leads to trickle down benefits. Because if these countries can't actually do anything with the rare earth minerals, they can't actually process it because they don't have the capacity to do so, then they are screwed. I want to note that this is probably intuitive because the machinery, the technology that you need to process these rare earth minerals and to process it into like actual goods, right, is concentrated in a few countries that already hoard these REs. So that means China has all the tech and all the machinery to process this. Other countries do not. Therefore, OG's benefits just doesn't materialize because they can't actually get their solar panels. You can't actually get their green tech because they don't have the capacity to process it and turn it into actual products. And I think OG already concedes that there's no benefit if people cannot process it. But lastly, this is important because it takes out OG because you're better able to prove that there is no impetus to force them to share. And even if you do force them to share, no benefits actually materialize. So how does an extension play into this? What did Arjun tell you? No, this extension is us being charitable. This argument operates in Gauss' best case where everyone opts in. We told you this would actually hurt supply chain. Because like OG concedes, the way they would restrict people is that they would probably want to have restrictions that probably reduce over extraction or to maintain long-term sustainability, or they probably want to reduce pollution. This means that the supply of rare earth elements actually decreases. But even if that isn't the case, the mere fact that you have all this bureaucracy, you have all these layers to pass through, everybody has to agree on what is the correct policy to be pushed out, all this bureaucracy just leads to more inefficiencies. This means that the value of each rare earth mineral skyrockets insofar as it is shortage that cannot meet the demand. This means that producers and manufacturers that turn into EV cars, that turn into smartphones, will pass on these high prices to their consumers because they still have the fiduciary incentive to maintain their profits and maintain dividends to their shareholders. But secondly, you also hurt developing countries because these third world countries will never be able to comply with your extreme regulation about like reducing pollution and all of these things, right? This means the US will probably be given the contract to mine things other than a third world country. You probably lock out a big source of income for poor countries and you give power to countries that already have a leverage. But this was extremely bad because we flip OG and we flip CG because other countries can no longer benefit and purchase low price green tech and you just reduce the speed of the green transition as a whole. What's the way then? I mean, firstly, we want uncertainty and scale because it proves why naturally prices will increase due to a shortage when restrictions are imposed. This is better than OO because it's unclear how countries deliberately jack up prices insofar as this is an independent body, not a cartel. But lastly, on our worst case, even if we do pollute marginally more on our comparative, we at least have the lower prices of REEs that will translate to lower prices of green tech. And this is how we achieve the green transition faster and we're better able to reverse any harms that we do to the environment. For all those reasons, CO.
All right, thank you so much, everybody. I invite everybody across the house. Give me 5 to 10 minutes to finalize my OA and decision. Thank you.